My wife, learning I was infertile, grew distant and eventually left for another man. Her family and friends reached out, but I refused to help. It's common to hear statements like, "I never saw it coming." That's exactly how it was for me. Though I had been married to my wife for 4 years, I honestly thought we were doing well. For the most part, I thought we were in accord. We had a life plan in place. The difficulty is that I felt we both wanted children. We started serious discussions about it as soon as we got married. She would continuously emphasize her wish for 2 or 3 children, droning on about the names we would give them, nursery decor, and other details. She would even spend hours online planning our future children's lives, browsing baby goods and clothing. It kept us linked and provided a topic for discussion. We were excited to begin this new chapter in our lives together, and everything seemed to be going as planned. But then we got some horrible news, which devastated me. After a few months of attempting to conceive, we went to the doctor to figure out what was happening. To shorten a long story short, it was me. The doctor essentially told us that our chances of naturally becoming parents were slim because my count was far too low. It felt like a stomach punch. I felt unworthy. Our entire set of plans went in an instant. The news hit me hard, incredibly hard. I found myself in a bad situation for a while. I was a total catastrophe at first, but therapy eventually helped. At first, she appeared to be quite supportive, saying that it didn't matter and that she would be okay with just the 2 of us. However, there was something off about the way she said it from the outset. She appeared to have dropped it way too quickly. She was all about creating a family 1 minute and then suddenly said she didn't need children to be happy. I understand that people's opinions evolve, but her entire behavior struck me as weird. She had stopped talking about children since she was preoccupied with baby names. Furthermore, it appeared that she began to perceive me in a different light. She would suddenly start making tiny barbs at me, something she had never said before. She would make comments about how I wasn't taking care of myself, how I should exercise, or how I should be more productive at home. Yes, I could have gained a few pounds, but it appeared like she was always looking for reasons to accuse me of something. When I asked her about the dramatic change in attitude, she dismissed it. She said that I was very sensitive and was just imagining things. But I knew there was something wrong. She was not like the woman I married, who would sit with me for hours discussing our future plans. She wasn't particularly harsh, but she had a frigid demeanor about her, as if she had already checked out mentally and was only acting. I think as time passed, I grew to trust her when she assured me that everything was fine. I didn't want to come across as needy or insecure, so I stopped pursuing the topic. In any event, after a few years, we were barely getting by. We had fallen into a practice of rarely discussing anything serious. We seemed like housemates rather than husband and wife. She would consistently ignore my attempts to discuss alternative options, such as adoption or surrogacy, by declaring that she did not want to consider them. I never believed her when she said, "As long as we're together, I'm happy." She seemed more interested in convincing herself than convincing me. She suddenly informed me that she wanted to go on a girls' trip. It wasn't unusual for her to travel with her buddies. She had done it several times previously, and I had always supported her. She had long expressed a desire to visit to America with her friends while we were living in Brighton. We had built trust over the years, so I didn't give it much attention. I ensured she had everything she needed, helped her pack, and took her to the airport. I remember her final remarks before she left. She looked at me and said, "Thank you for being so supportive." I found it unusual that she would say that when I hadn't done anything particularly spectacular. But she appeared so earnest that I discounted it as a simple expression of gratitude. That night, I stayed up to ensure everything ran perfectly. I called her when she came, kept myself busy about the house, watched TV, kept track of the time, and waited for her to text me to let me know she had arrived. Her flight was supposed to take about 9 hours, so I wasn't too concerned at first. When I realized her flight had landed, I contacted her to check in. The phone continued ringing but no one answered. I didn't give it much attention. I figured she was fatigued and had gone straight to her hotel to rest. However, as AM dawned and I still hadn't heard from her, a gnawing worry crept in. I assumed she was merely busy or her phone was on quiet, so I tried calling again and texted her a few times. After a few more hours of radio silence, I was completely freaked. Finally, I called her sister to see if she'd heard from her. Nothing. I was starting to panic. In the hopes that something had gone wrong with her phone or that she just hadn't had time to check in, I even called her purported travel companions. However, they were equally bewildered as I was. When I contacted, they said they hadn't joined her on the vacation. They were actually sitting in a cafe just 2 streets away from our house, drinking their morning coffee. That's when it really hit me. She was not traveling with any other girls. She had no friends with her. She hadn't traveled with anyone. She had simply disappeared. My stomach felt like it had fallen through the floor as I sat there holding the phone. I couldn't understand it. Why would she tell me that lie? Why didn't she tell me before leaving? I tried to tell myself that it was a mistake, perhaps she had missed a connecting flight or was delayed due to an emergency. But, deep inside, I knew the truth. She had planned it. Her stating, "Thank you for being so supportive," and the entire story of a girl's trip were all part of whatever plan she had in mind. I was at a loss for what to do. It seemed like I was locked in a nightmare, unable to awaken. I'd never married a woman like her. I didn't even recognize the person. The coldness, the fact that she had stopped discussing our future, and the subtle jabs at my appearance and health, all of this immediately made sense. I just hadn't noticed. Perhaps I didn't want to see that she'd been drifting away for a time. I just sat there that night, staring at my phone, waiting for a call, a text, anything. However, nothing happened, and I knew it wouldn't. I remember lying there staring at the ceiling, and when I awoke the next morning, I assumed it was all a bad dream. However, when I noticed that her side of the bed was vacant, reality hit in. She had actually left. After packed her bag, she vanished. The promises I had made to myself the previous evening, maybe she was late, maybe her phone died, were no longer legitimate. She had plainly planned it. She wanted to leave. I was in utter denial for the first few days. I kept contacting her phone, wanting to hear her voice and get an explanation. I even left messages, hoping she'd respond. I struggled to find words half of the time, but I kept trying. However, all I got in return was quiet. Strangely, the silence made matters worse. It was as if I'd always been a stranger to her, left alone to figure out what had gone wrong. Her family was originally as astonished as I was. They had not heard from her, and her mother had no idea of her plans. In the end, I visited her family more times than I could count, desperate to meet with her mother and gain some answers. They must have felt bad for me. When I couldn't bring myself to cook, her mother would make dinners for me. She occasionally allowed me to stay at their home. She'd sit with me as I talked about all the little things that didn't make sense, trying to figure out why my life had suddenly become so complicated. To be honest, there were times when I felt too numb to talk. I would simply sit there in solitude. I alternated between wrath, sorrow and guilt. What went wrong? I kept asking myself. Was there a sign that I missed? Wasn't I paying enough attention to her? On certain days, I would go over all of our disputes and chats, attempting to figure out what had caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I should have done better to save our marriage. It may sound dramatic, but I was possessed by the desire to find it out. I clung to the hope that obtaining the answer would somehow improve everything. I barely slept. I barely ate. My productivity began to decrease. People began to notice. When people inquired about my well-being, I would dismiss it as I was preoccupied with personal concerns. Admitting the truth, that my wife had abandoned me without saying anything, was too embarrassing. I eventually confided in a few close pals. They did their utmost to divert me by taking me out and pushing me to move on. But even when I was among them, my thoughts kept going to her. Where was she? Why wasn't I enough for her to stay? One of the most difficult parts was the constant inquiry from others, neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, and even former coworkers who had learned I was married. Each time someone inquired, "How's married life treating you?" Or, "How's your wife?" It was like peeling off a new scab. I'd simply grin and fib, assuring them everything was all right. But each time I said that lie, it felt heavier. Finally, treatment proved to be the only thing that helped. I'd never gone before, but after months of barely functioning, I realized I couldn't do it alone. I needed to speak with someone who was neutral and did not carry the weight of our common experience. I contacted a therapist and began attending weekly sessions. It helped. I talked constantly about her fury, betrayal, and the hole she had left behind. I talked about the sleepless nights, about lying awake and replaying every scene over and over. The therapist let me realize something I had not been able to accept. If she really wanted to stay, she would have. It was not my fault, she decided to depart. That was a difficult pill to swallow. For a long time, I believed myself that I was flawed and had somehow turned her away. However, I eventually came to see things differently. I chose to ignore her long-standing coldness and isolation, believing that things would improve on their own. I had convinced myself that if I just kept my cool and put in enough effort, I could save our marriage by myself. The revelation that I couldn't, that nothing was ever enough, hurt. As time passed, I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. It wasn't until she left that I realized how much I'd lost in our marriage. I had always tried my hardest to make her happy and to keep our home life comfortable. But now, with so much free time, I'm at a loss for what to do. So I began revisiting old pastimes that I had long forgotten. I tried making fresh meals. I went to the gymnasium. I started reading novels that I'd been putting off for years. Finally, my work improved. At first, I was just going through the motions, barely keeping up. However, when I began to feel more like myself, I increased my effort at work. It was one of the few things I still felt in control of, and it gave me a sense of success. I'd always been brilliant at what I did, but now I threw myself entirely into it. The extra hours, the focus, they paid off. I got a promotion. Something I would not have accomplished if I had spent all of my time drowning in my sadness. Nevertheless, there were difficult days. A picture, an old movie ticket stub, or another minor memory would abruptly transport me back to the past. I'd find myself wondering if she ever thought about me or regretted what she'd done. But as time passed, those instances got fewer and farther apart. Each time, it grew little easier to let go. I also reconnected with people I had lost touch with after getting married. We went trekking. We went to the golf range. I began doing activities that I hadn't done in years. Having friends by my side, people who weren't caught up in the turmoil and could support me without dragging me back into the pain, was a huge comfort. Looking back, I realized I had invested too much of myself in that connection. As her husband, I had lost a huge part of me. When she departed, it felt as if she had stolen a piece of me with her. However, I was gradually rediscovering myself. It was not quick, it was not easy. But I was making progress. At the end of that year, when I looked in the mirror, I saw more than simply a man whose wife had abandoned him. I'd rebuilt. I had survived. I was stronger now. For the first time in years, I felt free to live my life without her shadow lurking over me. And I took pride in it. I genuinely thought I'd moved on from everything. After all of the commotion, things had begun to feel normal again, or as normal as it could be. Work was progressing smoothly. My friends kept me busy. I had a routine down. Even my thoughts of her had disappeared. Sure, there were occasional flashbacks, odd recollections that appeared unexpectedly, but they weren't as often as previously, when everything I did seemed to be linked to her. She was the last person I expected to see standing outside my door on Saturday morning. But there she was. She holds a baby in her arms. I got chilled. It was like witnessing a ghost. For a little while, my brain ceased to operate. She appeared nearly identical, perhaps a touch worn down, but otherwise unchanged. And the way she looked at me, as if she truly believed I would be delighted to see her, moved me. I thought I had stopped caring. But meeting her again resurfaced emotions I had long suppressed. For a minute, I stood there in silence, staring. She smiled as if nothing had happened and asked, "May I come in?" A nerve. After everything she has done, she simply walks up here, expecting me to welcome her back with open arms. However, I kept my cool and told her, "No. You can stay right there." I said that I did not want her in my home, bringing all of the chaos back into the place I had established for myself. Despite her bewildered demeanor, she remained where she was and simply began her story. She began by saying, "I know this may come as a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything." Her look was hopeful, as if she genuinely felt I would be eager to listen. I was tempted to simply close the door in her face. Perhaps even laugh. But I was too curious. I was curious about the reason for her disappearance and the tale she had come up with. She went on to say that she had made a mistake in leaving and had now recognized that she had lost the best thing that had ever occurred to her. Not my words, but hers. She claimed that after much thought, and after having this child, she had finally realized what was truly essential in life. After years of ignoring me, it appeared that what was most important had unexpectedly brought her back to my doorstep. "This is our second chance," she said, looking down at the newborn. What I was hearing was incredible. Our second chance? As if this child were some sort of miraculous reset button, allowing us to resume where we left off. I was outraged on the inside, but my expression remained neutral. She went on to suggest that, despite having made a terrible mistake, we could now start over, just the three of us. She wanted us to be a family again. "Why did you leave?" That was the question that had haunted me since she first appeared. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I wasn't sure how long I could do it. Now that she was present, I needed to hear the truth. For years, I tortured myself with unlimited possibilities, attempting to make sense of everything. She hesitated, looking down at her feet, as if embarrassed. Then she finally said it. Or, at least, what she said was true. She stated that she had gone because she wanted a child, And she had found someone who could provide one, because I could not. She spoke nonchalantly, as if it were insignificant, as if she hadn't ruined my life, as if I should simply nod, accept, and go on. She went on to explain that, while the man she had left me for did not remain, she had already given birth and had realized she wanted me back. How convenient. I paused to digest what she was saying. She was standing here, confessing that she had abandoned me, fled with another guy, had his child, and now expected me to simply accept it. To pretend that none of this had ever occurred. So, you left. Found someone else. Had his baby? And now you think you can just come back and pretend like nothing happened? I responded with curiosity. She burst into tears and apologized repeatedly, acknowledging she had made a tremendous mistake. I remained unaffected. She kept talking, attempting to persuade me that she knew she was meant to be with me. That I was the person she actually loved. To be honest, it was difficult to maintain a straight face. She sounded deluded. The desperation was written all over her face. It wasn't love that brought her back. It was terror. Then she attempted to guilt-trip me. She went on and on about how tough it had been for her as a single mother, as if she were the victim in this whole situation. As if her own decisions had not brought her here. She assured me that this time, she was prepared to make it work. She said she needed my help. All I could think was, who does she think I am? I let her continue. I stood there listening. Then I'd had enough. You made your choice a long time ago, I informed her. And now you have to live with it. There's no second chance here. She appeared shocked. As if she had never considered the possibility that I may say no. As if she actually believed she could simply walk back into my life whenever it suited her. Then she felt enraged. Just when I thought she'd finally get it and leave, she lashed out, accusing me of being selfish. She demanded that I give her another chance and let her repair things. She even had the nerve to say, I could have taken half of everything and divorced you back then if I wanted to. And then she said it. The house should still be hers. At that point, I felt a burst of relief. Her disguise had finally slipped. Finally, I was seeing her actual self. I did not argue. I did not yell. I simply looked her in the eye and replied, we're done. You wanted a different life, and now you have it. This is no longer my responsibility, I simply stated, staring at her. Then I closed the door in her face, interrupting her mid-sentence. I was not interested in hearing what else she had to say. As I stood there, listening to her muffled screaming from the other side of the door, I felt strangely calm. She had the ability to shout, cry, and knock at will. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never allow her back in. The woman I had once loved and married no longer existed. In her place stood a stranger, a self-centered, entitled stranger who believed she could pick up the pieces whenever it suited her. I stepped away from the door and sat down, feeling lighter than I have in years. I assumed that was the end of it. I figured she would eventually understand and walk away. But no. Instead, she began hammering on the door, screaming various things. Her bravery is admirable. She had the guts to stand up and insist that I listen to her. Here. At my door. The one spot I fought to recapture after she abandoned me. At first, I pondered ignoring her and letting her scream until she got exhausted. But then curiosity got the better of me. I was curious what kind of excuses she would come up with this time. So I opened the door. Just enough to let her know I was listening. Not enough to allow her in. She appeared stunned. As if she'd just been smacked. As if she expected me to react differently. As if we were simply having a usual dispute rather than coping with the implications of her abandonment. Then she began into a long monologue. She expressed her willingness to forgive me for closing the door on her. About her desire to start over. She went on and on about how, if we both worked hard, we could get things fixed. And that's when I lost it. I laughed. Not simply a chuckle, a full, sincere and unrestrained laugh, because this woman possessed more nerve than I had ever seen. When I did, she snapped. She was enraged, as if I had harmed her. As if I were the one who should feel guilty. You left, I informed her, my tone even. You had your chance, and you threw it all away. I'm not just going to pretend none of that happened because you feel like it. Her face turned crimson. Then she started talking about how lost she had felt after leaving. She discovered her mistake too late. You don't understand how hard it was for me, she told me. I didn't believe any of it. No, I replied. You made the decision to leave. You planned it, you lied about it, and then, you went through with it. Now, I scoffed. Now your regret means nothing. And that's when she finally gave up the act. Her entire demeanor changed. The gloomy, remorseful woman was gone. In her place was the bitter, greedy individual she had always been. She attacked me. She accused me of being harsh and not having the grace to give her another chance. Then she said it. If I'd wanted to, I could have taken everything from you back then. I could have taken half of everything you own. She genuinely stated that. I just stood there, staring at her in bewilderment. This woman, who had abandoned me without saying anything, now claimed she was deserved something for not screwing me over even more. As if she deserved recognition for not being as bad as she could have been. So, what? Am I supposed to be grateful? I requested an explanation. Grateful that you only ditched me and didn't take my stuff too. Her expression shifted between wrath, desperation, and remorse. But I didn't care anymore. That was it. That was the point at which all of the years I had spent questioning myself, wondering if I had done something wrong, vanished. For the first time in years, I saw her as she truly was. I felt free. But she wasn't done. She began pacing my porch, shouting about how I'd regret not giving her another chance. I'd never find somebody like her again. She even tried to make it appear as if I was the one losing, as if she were the prize. It was surreal. This was the same woman who had demolished everything we'd constructed. Yet there she was, acting as if I should be asking her to stay. When she realized I wasn't going to cave, she grew louder. She began ranting about how I forced her to leave in the first place. She claimed that none of this would have occurred if I had been more accepting of the entire kid scenario. Her rationale was perplexing. She was actually implying that I had failed her as a husband because I was unable to conceive. As if this validated her decision to have a child with someone else. The mental gymnastics were incredible. To be honest, I was stunned that she was attempting to blame me for her actions. I glanced at her and commented, "Look, if you wanted a kid that badly, you could have just told me the truth. You didn't have to lie to my face and pretend everything was fine while planning your escape." She gave no response. She simply gazed at me, as if I had hit her. But I did not let her talk. "You made that decision entirely on your own," I continued. "And now you have to live with it. That's not my problem." She made one last attempt. Her face returned to that depressed expression, and she pleaded with me to think about the boy. She said I was being unjust by ignoring him. She tried to make me feel guilty by holding the youngster in her arms. As if I were the villain in this scenario. But I was not buying into it. "I don't know that child," I informed her firmly. "I have nothing to do with him. He's not mine. And neither are you." That was it. I noticed it in her eyes. For the first time, she understood. She understood that I would never change my opinion. I would never allow her back into my life. The wrath in her expression dissipated, to be replaced by something else, perhaps regret. Or maybe she was just frustrated because her manipulation wasn't working. I didn't care. She had expected me to fold, forgive, and accept her back. But she was nothing to me now. She waited there for a few more seconds, as if waiting for me to reconsider my decision. I didn't utter another word. And as it dawned on her that I meant every word, I stood there, observing her. Then I closed the door. This time, I did not wait for her to knock again. This time, I knew in my heart that I'd already made up my mind. There was no turning back. I'm not sure why, but I felt like I had finally won. It ended as I moved away from the door. She'd spent a lot of time attempting to manipulate her way back into my life. But I had freedom. There would be no second chances for either her or us. She was now merely a memory, something I had finally put behind me. And for the first time in years, I felt as like I could breathe again. After so many years of pain and guilt, I felt at peace. And you know what? It was pleasurable. When I closed the door behind her, I felt a strange sensation of calm sweep over me. I no longer felt sad. I was not furious. I wasn't even astonished anymore. It was as if all the years of effort I had put into her had vanished, along with the pain, guilt, and never-ending wondering. I was prepared to go on. Because I had finally received the closure I had never known I needed. This time, it was really over. However, life never ends smoothly. A few days later, I received a text from her mother. She apologized. She expressed her embarrassment at how her daughter had handled everything. She had tried to reason with her, but it was evident that it had not worked. Her mother was a kind woman. She had been kind to me when her daughter departed, and I could tell she was genuinely upset about the situation. I didn't have anything against her. However, I did not want to be dragged back into any of it. So I just answered, "Thanks for checking in," and left it at that. I wasn't going to waste time justifying my decisions, and I wasn't going to give her mother any additional information. She knew it was over because she understood. Over the next few weeks, I discovered bits and pieces via social media and mutual relationships. She had allegedly moved back in with her parents, and things were not going well. The child's father, the man she had left me for, was not involved at all. He had bailed. She was left to figure things out on her own, as he had apparently not committed to the long term. Few people wanted to help her. She'd burned almost every bridge. Her previous acquaintances, many of whom had backed me when she initially went missing, had little sympathy for her. They were not about to get drawn back into her drama. They'd all moved on. And frankly, you can't blame them. Even her parents weren't pleased. They did not have the financial resources to maintain her and the child. I knew this because, immediately after her mother texted me, her father called. Curiosity got the best of me. I almost didn't respond. He was clear yet respectful. He added that they were hurting financially and quietly suggested that I might be able to assist them. He spoke about the youngster and how terrible things were for them. "We know you cared about her once," the man added. I listened politely, but the irony of the situation made me laugh within. Then he went on and on about how his daughter only needed a little support to get back on her feet. That's when I joined in. "Your daughter made her choices," I said, my voice calm but forceful. "I am neither in a position, nor in the right frame of mind, to help her." He didn't press the subject. I believe he received the message. Then, out of nowhere, individuals I hadn't communicated with in years, her old friends, began to reach out. Some attempted to use guilt, telling me that she was struggling and that I should find it in my heart to give her another chance. One even had the guts to suggest, "The child requires a father figure. Do not let resentment prevent you from doing the right thing." I refused to back down. I refused to let anyone make me feel guilty about my decision. I'd already given the woman everything I had. Years of self-doubt, trying to be enough, and she'd thrown it all away. Instead of expecting me to save her, she had to accept responsibility for her own actions. The calls and mails gradually slowed and eventually stopped completely. It seems that everyone had finally understood I was serious. That I'd moved on. That I wouldn't get pulled back in. And that's when I really felt at ease. For the first time in years, my life seemed normal. I had friends. My job. My routines. I'd recreated my life on my own terms. It wasn't lavish or glamorous, but it was mine. Ironically, I found myself rediscovering joy in the small things. Things I had overlooked when I was married. I began reading novels that I had planned to read for years. I cooked my own meals. I took long walks. And for the first time, I felt liberated. I didn't need anybody's approval. I wasn't always concerned about someone else's happiness. For once, I arrived first. Every now and then, I would come across someone who knew us both. They'd say, "Hey, whatever happened to her?" I would respond briefly, politely, and change the subject. I didn't need to revisit that part of my life. It wasn't like I was hiding anything. I had previously perfected the capacity to abandon her. The last I heard, things were still not going well for her. She was jumping between her parents' house and sleeping on friends' couches. She couldn't keep a consistent job. Occasionally, someone I barely communicated with would message me, saying she needed aid from anyone who would listen. Some even suggested that she was still hoping I would reconsider. That maybe one day, I'd alter my mind and play father to her child. But that wasn't going to happen. I'd worked too hard to reconstruct my life. She'd made her bed. And I wasn't going to be the one picking up the pieces. Nothing could bring me back into that chapter. I was finished. In the end, I believe I found the closure I needed. She was now facing the repercussions of her own actions. And me? For the first time since she departed, I felt entirely and really free. I'd finally let go of the weight she had left behind. And you know what? I was pleased. Not in a big dramatic way. Just content, and it was enough.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.